Part 20. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruanmeng Baobao. Chapter 191. They started to find fault. Since they posted a notice to sever ties with you, why bother showing off as an elder? Madame Su watched Suwon return the gift, her kind eyes filled with sadness. Wan, do you want to draw a clear line with your grandmother? No, Suwon didn't know how to explain to Mrs. Su that she was not a descendant of the Su family, so she couldn't take her things. But her life experience is a secret and cannot be revealed for the time being, otherwise it will cause a lot of trouble. Mrs. Su was a sensible person. Seeing Suwon hesitate, she seemed to not know how to speak, and looked very embarrassed. She tightened her grip on the crutch, suspecting that Suwon knew about her life experience and was worried that she was not of the Su family's blood, so she refused to accept her things. Wan, you don't have to think too much. In my grandmother's heart, you will always be her granddaughter. Mrs. Su's smile was a little lonely and sad. No one hopes more than she does that Suwon is her biological granddaughter. However, times have changed, and she is glad that Suwon is not her biological granddaughter. It is too unfortunate for Suwon to have a biological father like Sujihong who is so promiscuous. When I promised the Queen Mother to propose marriage to the Chi family, what I was thinking was that if there was no Su family, there would be another family. At that time, I was eager to find a match for Hong and the Queen Mother made a promise of hereditary succession. I was possessed by the devil and married him into the house. Madame Su smiled bitterly. She really hoped that Sujihong could live a good life with Chi Min until Sujihong found a slave for Chi Min and took him away from Chi Min's room after his death. She only found out about this, and she knew that this family would be over sooner or later. Mrs. Su has been living with guilt for so many years. If she had not come to ask for marriage, maybe Chi Min would not have suffered from this. You won't die young, right? Mrs. Su couldn't bear to tell Suwon the following words, so she only said vaguely, you know your life experience. Even if you don't recognize your grandmother, I can understand it. Suwon did not expect that Chi Min would have hidden secrets when she married into the Su family, and that the Queen Mother would also intervene. From Mrs. Su's words, it can be determined that she already knew that she was not Sujihong's daughter, but she also didn't know that she was Ji Xian's daughter. From her guilt, she vaguely guessed that there was something else hidden. You don't have to feel guilty. Under the circumstances at that time, the Queen Mother deliberately intervened and would not stop until the goal was achieved. Although Sujihong was nothing, at least Mrs. Su was sincerely good to them. Only if you accept the things will I feel at ease. Mrs. Su's eyes were red with tears. Wan, if you don't want to accept the things, just donate them to the temple and build a golden body for the Bodhisattva. Suwon thought this method was appropriate. We will go to the temple and donate these things to protect your health. Mrs. Su smiled and said nothing more. The carriage stopped at the foot of the mountain. Suwon helped Mrs. Su go up the mountain to the national temple. When the young novice heard that Madame Su wanted to donate money for sesame oil, she immediately invited her to the dormitory and asked the abbot to receive her in person. Mrs. Su felt a layer of sadness in her heart, feeling that this was her last connection with Suwon, and it was unknown whether they would see each other again in the future. Her heart dropped. At this time, the abbot came. Suwon saw at a glance that Master Weiren was following the abbot. His eyes were very deep, so dark that there was no trace of extra light. They were not the compassionate eyes of a monk. They were like blades that could penetrate the surface and directly hit people's souls. See her through. This look made Suwon very uncomfortable, just like the way he looked at Weiren when he met her at Su's house, as if he could see through her. This body contained a lonely ghost. He performed a Buddhist ritual and said to Suwon, Donor, the poor monk has something to give you. You come with the poor monk. As if he thought that Suwon would not go, he added, it was you who left it here in the first place. The time has come for these things to be returned to their original owners. The last two words, I don't know if Suwon was overthinking them, but Wyron bit them very hard. The author has something to say. Dear babies, Soft Bayo has been busy these 2 days and there have been few updates. Updates will be resumed tomorrow, okay. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 192. Grandma, I'll go to the Zen room with Master Wyron to get something. I'll be back soon. Suwon glanced at Wyron and joked, if I forget the time, you have to send someone to rush me, and I have to send you there. Temple, can't waste time. Mrsu patted the back of Suwon's hand and said, okay, since you haven't been here for half an hour, my grandmother sent someone to invite you. Suwon followed Master Wyron to the meditation room, with Chi Jiajin following behind. Wyron Quan pretended not to see it and went to his meditation room. The young novice monk finished sweeping and left the meditation room. Wyron entered and said to Suwon, this matter must not be seen by anyone other than you. Suwon paused and left Chi Jiajin outside. Wyron closed the door. The sunlight shines in through the wooden door lattice, the Zen room is bright and clean, and the sandalwood scent lingers, making people feel inexplicably calm. Suwon sat on the kong. Wyron took out a long box from the high pavilion, placed it on the kong table, and motioned to Suwon to open it. Suwon didn't know what Wyron was doing. The look from Su Mansion made her feel inexplicably upset, so she kept avoiding Wyron. She traveled through time into a book, which was very metaphysical in nature. Wyron is a Buddhist, so she has to be afraid. Open the box and inside is a scroll. Suwon looked at Wyron, who was playing with the Buddhist beads and chanting sutras. She took out the scroll, untied the string, and slowly unfolded it. The scene in the painting stood before her eyes. The sky was filled with fires, all lives were devoured, and corpses were scattered all over the fields. Suwon seemed to be sucked into the scroll, feeling firsthand the cruel war with smoke and raging fire, throats cut with sharp blades, blood on the face, and corpses wrapped in sima leather. The people are in dire straits, displaced and starved to death everywhere, as if they are in purgatory. Too tragic. Her fingers trembled and she didn't understand why Wyron showed her this painting. I don't believe it was stored by the original owner. You are not her. Wyron opened his eyes and said the first thing. Suwon was shocked. Although it was expected that there would still be a wave, her face was calm and she was not disturbed by his words. She asked back, Master is really good at joking. If I'm not me, who could I be? Wyron chanted the Buddha's name, and he stayed in seclusion for 3 years and had a life of great dreams. After waking up, he was like Zhuangzhou dreaming of a butterfly. It was like walking through a lifetime in a dream. All the trajectories in the dream are the same as in reality. The only difference is Suwon. She was an accident. She died in her dream, because she sold Gu Beizu and Gu Jingyun, resulting in their tragic deaths, and she died at the hands of Gu Huizi. Gu Huizi quickly climbed to the pinnacle of power and fought openly and secretly with the prince and princess. In the end, Gu Huizi died of poison because of Ju Yu's help. The prince inherits the throne, and the prince concubine is canonized as the queen. The Great Zhou dynasty was peaceful for 3 years. The queen of Ziliang suddenly went on a mission to the Great Zhou dynasty. Only then did everyone know the true identity of the queen. She was actually Qi Min, the daughter of General Qi of the Great Zhou dynasty. After learning about the deaths of Suwon and the regent, she returned to the western Liang kingdom. Using 11 Liang as bait, they teamed up with the other 2 countries to help them attack the Great Zhou dynasty. If anyone took the heads of Ji Wuifeng, Su Mingxiu, and Sujihong, they would hand over 11 Liang to them, with blood letters as evidence. This move completely broke the checks and balances among the 4 countries. Qi Min wanted to kill Ji Wuifeng, Su Mingxiu, and Sujihong at all costs. When there is a war, it is the people who suffer. Chi Min's sins are serious. She personally took off the heads of these people, wrote an edict of guilt, and finally jumped off the city wall. The world in front of Wyron seemed to be collapsing and turning into ashes. He suddenly woke up, still as if in a dream. Chi Min said in front of his senior brother, Master Huiming, Chi Min asks you to save Ji Xian and Wan Wan, eliminate their karma and hatred, so that they can reincarnate. All sins are caused by me and will be borne by me. I wish to never enter reincarnation and atone for my sins. Huiming said, for your own selfishness, you have caused all the people in the world to suffer, and your sins are so serious. How can you resolve them without entering reincarnation? The Qi family has guarded the territory of the Zhou dynasty for generations, and protected the safety of the people. As a Qi family, you are worthy of being listed among your ancestors. Ancestors. The men of the Qi family spilled their blood on the battlefield, and their bodies were wrapped in horse leather. The defending Zhou dynasty could not tolerate the children and grandchildren of the Qi family. Qi Min said coldly, in front of the great love of my country, I only know that I am an ordinary mother. Qi the family has to protect them with their lives, but who will protect the Qi family's children? Buddhism emphasizes cause and effect, and this is cause and effect. When Wyron thinks about it now, Qi Min's resentment and hostility are still shocking. He immediately left the border to investigate the incident. Everything that happened before was the same as in the dream. Things began to go wrong when Su Wan was preparing to sell Gu Beizu and Gu Jingyun. As he observed, Su Wan's behavior was very different from before, so he suspected that Su Wan was no longer the same person as before. Su Wan. Wyron was convinced of what happened in the dream. He believed that it was the instructions given to him by the Buddha to prevent this from happening. Su Wan's change was the compassion of Buddha, in order to save the world. He originally wanted to follow the Buddha's instructions directly and get rid of the root cause of all this. Su Wan's change caused all situations to change. Qi Min seems to have received karmic retribution and is about to become seriously ill and die. This is the troubled world after your death, caused by Qi Mi, and your arrival is the mercy of the Buddha. If you go against the Buddha's will and save Qi Min, who has sinned so much, I'm afraid you will also perish. Wyron read. Amitabha stood up and said, this is your cause and effect, you take it away. Su Wan felt a thump in her heart and wanted to ask more questions. Wyron was already sitting cross-legged on the futon, meditating and reciting scriptures. She looked at the scroll in her hand and tried to recall the plot in hegemony, but in the end it just ended with Ji Wuifeng proclaiming himself emperor. Later, Qi Min actually started a war? Judging from Wyron's attitude, could it be because of her? But Qi Min got married in Ziliang, had 2 children, and ignored her for more than 10 years. Didn't he abandon her? Could it be that there is another secret? Su Wan walked out of the Zen room with a long wooden box in her arms. The person sent by Mrs. Su happened to arrive at the door. Miss, the old lady is looking for you. Yes. Su Wan wandered around and went to Mrs. Su's dormitory. When Su Wan arrived at the door, Abbot Huiming happened to come out. Su Wan performed a Buddhist salute. When she passed by, Huiming suddenly looked at her again, his compassionate eyes passing over the long wooden box in her arms. Su Wan's heart dropped, she put her thoughts away, and walked to Mrs. Su. Seeing that there was still a trace of sadness in her eyes, she couldn't help asking, Grandma, what's wrong? Grandma lit a lotus lantern for you, a longevity lantern, and built a golden body for the Bodhisattva to bless my Wan Wan with a long life and safety. Mrs. Su brushed Su Wan's fine velvet hair on her temples, and there was something in her eyes. A little bit of moisture. Looking at the things in her arms, did Master Wyron give you something? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Bao Bao. Chapter 193. He gave it to me. Suwan smiled. This was the chaotic world Wyron painted. In Wyron's heart, it was because of her death that Chi Min started the war and plunged the people into misery. He understood that he was not the original owner, but thought it was the mercy of the Buddha. If it were not for him, Zhuang Zhoumendi, who could destroy her identity, would he regard her as a monster? Suwan immediately denied it. If it weren't for Zhuang Zhoumendi, he probably wouldn't have been able to tell whether she had changed the core. Grandma, Buddha will definitely bless me with a long life. Suwan determined to go to Ziliang Kingdom to find out the whole story. Wyron believed that the Buddha had given instructions and he should not save Chi Min, otherwise he would repeat the same mistakes and bring disaster to all living beings in the world. But Suwan had a different view. The Buddha's mercy allowed her to travel through time and space and live in place of the original owner, thus preventing the tragedy from happening at the root. As long as she lives, how can Chi Min be so angry and filled with hatred, and seek revenge at all costs? This is the cycle of cause and effect. All of this was just Wyron Wu's misunderstanding. She wanted to see if she would die after saving Chi Min. Mrsu smiled kindly, looking at Suwan with eyes full of pity and love. It's getting late, let's set off quickly. Suwan took Mrsu's arm and walked out. Mrsu followed Suwan's footsteps and left the National Temple and went to Qingyun Temple in Qingyun Mountain next door. Suwan sent Mrsu over, settled in, had a fast meal, and then started back. The way back to the capital from Qingyun Mountain is through the road at the foot of Kuasi Mountain, and not only is the mountain road rugged for this distance, but there is an abyss on the roadside. The carriage moved very slowly, and Chi Lu was very experienced in driving. Chi Jiajin had been hiding in the mountains for so many years, so he was very good at driving the carriage through the mountain roads. Suddenly, Chi Lu saw a carriage driving slowly in front of him. He frowned and looked up at the mountains on the inside and the cliffs on the outside. This mountain road was only big enough for 2 carriages. It requires cooperation from both parties to slowly pass by. He stretched his neck, trying to see whether the carriage on the other side was going to the outside or close to the inside, so he could adjust the carriage. Suddenly, his pupils shrank and he saw all the people in the carriage and the driver getting out. The horse pulling the carriage suddenly neighed and ran towards him like crazy. Chi Liu's heart was grasped by a hand and he shouted loudly, "Miss, jump out of the car." Suwan opened the car curtain and saw the carriage rushing from the opposite side. Suddenly a huge boulder rolled down the mountain and hit the carriage with a destructive attitude. Boom! There was a loud bang. The carriage turned sideways and fell into the abyss. Everything was silent. Suwan's heart beat thumping, thumping, thumping hard against her heart, causing pain every time. Chi Liu's hands and feet were numb, and it took him a while to find his voice. He pursed his dry lips and said with difficulty, just fell. Just like dreaming. Escaped from hell. Pinch me. Chi Lu pointed at his face and said to Suwan, pinch me here, harder. Suwan glanced at the mountain, and there was only the sound of the breeze rustling the leaves. It was more like a mountain stone that just collapsed and hit the carriage. He raised his eyebrows, could it really be the Buddha's blessing? She lowered her eyes and looked at Chi Liu's stupid look, then pricked him with a needle. Ouch! Chi Lu howled. Are you sure it's a hallucination or reality? Suwan played with the silver needle between her fingers. Do you want to do it again? No, 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 no. Chi Liu's cheek muscles twitched twice, he rubbed his cheeks, and said resentfully, sit back and let me drive. Suwan got into the carriage, opened the curtains, and looked at Jace Han. Chi Lu also observed carefully. He just saw someone getting off the carriage and hiding in the mountains. He was the only one protecting Suwan, and he did not dare to rush to the mountains to investigate, for fear of falling into a trap and putting Suwan in danger. The carriage drove through the mountain road of Qingyun Mountain. On the mountain where the green shade covered the sky, two people were standing and one person fell on the ground. Kinglan's whole body was shaking like chaff, and her neck was pinched by a hand. Her face turned pale, and she stared at the man in front of her in fear. His face was wrapped in a black scarf, and only his eyes were exposed. These cold eyes felt familiar to her, but in a life and death situation, Kinglan's mind went blank. She regretted coming here and wanted to see Suwon fall off the cliff with her own eyes so that she could relieve the hatred in her heart, but she didn't expect that she would fall into the hands of a thief. His lips trembled a few times, wanting to beg for mercy. Suddenly, I recognized who it was. Her pupils tightened, and she forced out a sound from her throat, G. The man in black tightened his fingers. Kinglan had no time to struggle, and there was a click and her neck was broken. Seeing that her head was tilted and she was out of breath, the man in black turned his eyes to the unconscious coachman on the ground. He pulled a token from his waist and threw it on the ground. He directly pulled off Kinglan's belt, put it around her neck, and hung her from the tree. Superior. After thinking for a while, he also hoisted the driver up so that his feet could touch the ground. Because he had fainted and his whole body was limp, his neck was hung tightly on the belt. The man in black woke up the coachman and left quickly. The coachman woke up in discomfort and struggled to put his feet on the ground. He hurriedly took off the belt around his neck and fell to the ground with weak legs. When he saw the token on the ground, his heart jumped into his throat and he was shocked. Dingyuan Ho Mansion. Sujihong's wound had been bandaged and was not contaminated with poison. His face was green and black, and Suwon made another move. "Where's Madam?" Sujihong looked at the sky and saw that Kinglan had been out for a long time and still hadn't seen anyone. "Are you back?" "Master Marquis, my wife said that she has been in bad luck recently. She went to the temple to burn incense to get rid of her bad luck, but she hasn't come back yet." The servant counted the time and carefully replied, "It's time to come back at this time." Sujihong raised his hand to press his beating right eyelid, feeling suddenly uneasy. "You arrange for someone to go to the national temple to pick up the wife." Sujihong stood up as he spoke, "Forget it, I'll go there myself." The servant hurriedly arranged for people to accompany him, and went to the stable to tell the driver to hitch the horse. Sujihong strode to the door and saw Kinglan's coachman in a panic, with a stern look in his eyes. "What's going on? Where's Madam?" The driver knelt down in front of Sujihong and cried loudly, "Master Marquis, husband, Madam was hanged to death. The murderer stunned the villain and hung me on a tree. Fortunately, I woke up and escaped. One calamity. This is the token that the villain picked up on the ground. It was dropped by the murderer." Sujihong was confused, as if he couldn't understand what the driver said. "Master Marquis, I have seen this token before. The people around the prince have this kind of token." The coachman handed the token to Sujihong. "All the guards brought by the madam have been killed." Sujihong took the token and recognized it at a glance as the token belonging to the prince's subordinate. His hands clenched into fists, and the bandaged wounds collapsed. The veins on his forehead protruded, and his eyes were full of evil energy. The prince said that the regent wanted his life and ordered the prince to find evidence of his crime. He actually believed the prince's words, but he did not expect that the prince had murderous intentions towards him, and was afraid that he would reveal what the prince had done. Sujihong sneered and made Ji Wuifeng pay the price. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruanmeng Baobao. Chapter 194. Wanfen Hall. The prince leaned back in the armchair, his right arm resting on the armchair casually, and his left hand rubbing his forehead, as if he was encountering a difficult problem. When he was engaged to Suwon, the queen was pregnant. He was full of crisis for his status, so he and Sujihong secretly built an arsenal, selling weapons to barbarians in exchange for war horses and a lot of money, to enrich his own wings. Before the regent asked him to make a choice, Sujihong had said that sisters Suwan and Su Mixu had a deep relationship and were lonely in the palace. He wanted to make Su Mixu his crown prince Liangdi, so that the two sisters could have a companion. Mutual support. He also used the fact that Suwan had the blood of 11 Liang people to persuade her, if Suwan marries the royal family, she will not have any children in this life. Even if you love her and are willing to let her have an heir, it will only be a matter of male or female. Your Highness, your favorite is Suwan. If a son from another favorite concubine succeeds, how can you tolerate her? It's different if it's Shu'er, who can adopt the child into her lap. The prince laughed in his heart. Before he could sit in that position, the heir to the throne, Sujihong, had already been arranged. In order to stabilize Sujihong, he agreed. The prince's hand touched his right arm, and the numbness seemed to still exist. Thinking of Suwan's words, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He was the crown prince of a country and had never put a farmer's son in his eyes. Back then, he complied with the regent's choice and married Su Mixu as the crown prince. He once proposed that Suwan be his concubine. After he ascended the throne, he would have full power. If you have it in hand, you can canonize her as queen. But the regent refused to agree and had to force Suwan to marry Gu Huizi. At that time, he thought that the regent disliked Suwan because he hated Qi Min for abandoning him. Now that Suwan was living in the prince regent's mansion and could come and go as he pleased, he thought something wrong. Perhaps the regent had never thought of promoting him to the throne, so he asked Suwan to marry a peasant. In the future, with his position as regent, it would be easy to promote Gu Huizi. If he chooses to marry Suwan, will the regent really remove him from the position of crown prince? Your Highness, Jilin knocked on the door. The prince came back to his senses from the chaotic thoughts. He was still dwelling on the past, but Suwan had let go of him and treated him as a stranger. The past relationship had disappeared, and even hating him seemed unnecessary for Suwan. Come in. The prince put away his thoughts and looked at Jilin, who came in from the outside. How did things go? The regent wanted him to have an internal conflict with Sujihong. All he could do was destroy the evidence and create an accident to kill Sujihong. Before that, he had to win over Mr. Zhang quickly. When Jilin raised his hand, his fingertips accidentally flicked the token on his waist. He bowed and said, "Back to your Highness, Mr. Zhang has already left the capital after handling the affairs of the Imperial College." His subordinates traced the traces, and only found out where he went. After Jiangnan, there is nowhere else to be found. The prince's face darkened. Continue checking. His eyes passed over the leafy tree outside the window. The leaves were withered and yellow, and they were falling in the breeze, as if it was a sign that he would fall from the clouds like these fallen leaves. His hands suddenly clenched into fists and hit the table hard. On the cold and stern face, the brows and eyes were particularly gloomy. It seems that he is determined to break the cauldron. Jilin's heart skipped a beat when he saw this, and he had a bad feeling. He didn't dare to ask any more questions at the moment, for fear that some flaws would be revealed, so he accepted the order and retreated. The prince summoned the people and gave a few instructions with a ruthless look on his face. The author has something to say. Hey guys, there will be an update later. It will be very late. I will watch it when I get up tomorrow morning, okay? The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruanmeng Baobao. Chapter 195. Suwan experienced the thrill of Qingyun Mountain, returned to the regent's mansion, and went directly to the front yard study to visit the regent. The regent's expression looked worse than before, and Suwan's heart tightened. All the medicines given to him were carefully considered over and over again. Although it won't cure his poisonous poison, his condition is at least stable. Suddenly, I thought of Qi Min. Could it be that her situation was getting worse and worse, causing the regent's situation to become worse? Let me see. Suwan pursed her lips and came back from Master Wyron. Her mood was different. She was no longer repulsive about going to Ziliang, but rather felt a bit eager. There are only 2 days left for departure. The short 3 days suddenly became extremely long. Suwon wished that a pair of wings could grow on her back and fly to Ziliang in an instant. The regent saw her frowning and thinking about the day she was going to Ziliang. The anxiety in her eyes rarely showed the look that a girl should have. From the moment I formally met her, she has always been calm and calm. Extremely sophisticated. You really want to go? The regent held a black handkerchief in his hand, covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Tell me what happened today, and I'll listen. Suwon was startled. I have nothing to do today, so I asked Luo Cheng about your past. The regent smiled, with a hint of loneliness in his eyebrows. Before you get married, if I get to know you, I can do more for you. At that time, you loved beauty and beautiful things. What you wanted most was a father who would treat you wholeheartedly. It was because of my mistake that I made you have to do something wrong. Grow up. You have done so well in everything that I can't even begin to do what my father wanted me to do. When he said this, the strong man in front of him curled his lips in a self-deprecating manner. You are wrong. No matter what I was in the past or what I am now, what I want most is a father who truly loves me. Suwon withdrew her finger to check his pulse, pulled down his sleeve and smoothed it, with a smile in her tone. I went to the Su mansion to pick up Mrs. Su today and stabbed Sujihong. What I was thinking at the time was that I have a father who covers the sky with one hand. I am not afraid that Sujihong will retaliate against me because I have my father's backing. Anyway, I have a great father who will give me a lot of courage. I can be unscrupulous outside without any scruples. I can just enjoy my grudges. On your side, you have a daughter who can only cause trouble, so you have to worry a lot. Suwon tilted her head and smiled brightly at him, her dark pupils full of admiration. Father, you have to get well. You are here, not people dare to bully me. The regent chuckled, listening to her childish words to comfort him, an old father who wanted to get close to his daughter but couldn't find the right way, and felt very powerless for this. You are Ji Xian's daughter, you should be so wanton. The regent's broad hand fell on her head and stroked her silky hair. You are tired after a day out, go and rest. Okay. Suwon was about to go back and continue studying medical books. Wait a minute. The regent covered his mouth and coughed, letting go of his breath, and then said, the Su family and Ji Wuifeng sent you a message, you don't need to pay attention to it. Suwon knew what he was going to do to the Su family and Ji Wuifeng, fearing that she would be implicated. After all, she was now the regent's personal doctor. I have nothing to do these 2 days, so I will stay in the house and not go anywhere. Suwon straightened her hair, waved to him, and left the study. The Prince Regent laughed and put his fingers on the cold white jade teacup, his smile gradually falling. When Luo Cheng came in, he saw his eyes falling into the void, holding a cup of cold tea with a few fingers. Master, I will give you a cup of hot tea. While talking, he came over to take it away. No need. The Prince Regent avoided his hand, placed the teacup on the Kong table, and gently rubbed half a circle around the rim of the cup with his fingers. What's the news? Jilin killed Kinglin, and Sujihong wanted to take revenge on the prince. The prince arranged for Jilin to investigate Mr. Jiang's whereabouts. Mr. Jiang seemed to have been aware of the situation in the DPRK for a long time, and took Gu Beizu and Gu Jingyun to live in seclusion. The prince wanted to. The plan of using Mr. Jiang to control you has failed, and I am afraid that if I get desperate, I will make a desperate move. Luo Cheng said worriedly, you still have 2 days to leave the capital, and I'm afraid it's too late to pull the prince down. He wants to fight with his back, just to attack me. The regent said calmly, with a hint of sneer on his lips. It is a good time for me to go to Ziliang as an envoy. I will leave all this to Ting Yuan. The prince will murder me for this reason. He will be imprisoned in the Zonggren mansion. If he complains of injustice, he will be interrogated in person when the king comes back from Ziliang. The prince was imprisoned, and his people were leaderless and fell into pieces. Half a year was enough for Gu Huizi to uncover the prince's evidence and trump card. Luo Chen was already used to the regent's domineering behavior, and he was still polite to the prince. At least he would pretend to lay out the bait, and wait for the prince to take the bait. The people on the side, just based on their mood, said you were guilty and ordered you to be cuffed away. 18 kinds of torture are used in turn. Even if there is no evidence of guilt, you can still pry open the other party's mouth and force out the evidence. If you are not afraid of life and death, you will not force a confession even after death, and you will commit suicide out of fear of crime. Who dares to question? No one arrested is innocent. He, a seemingly ruthless person, actually values love and justice the most. The Queen Mother had many plans against him and hurt his life. Because of the kindness of giving birth, she just imprisoned him in the national temple. At this moment, Luo Cheng felt grateful to Qi Min, grateful that she had left a child for his master. Su Wan's heart almost flew to Ziliang, but she knew there was no rush and could only pray that Qi Min could turn the crisis into safety. She could not save the fire from the distant water, nor could she control the situation on her side from the regent's side. She simply refused to read the medical book, started to pack the boxes, and stayed in the yard to wait for Gu Huizi. The two of them cherished their short time. But Gu Huizi was too busy, so she stayed up until midnight and couldn't sleep. She didn't wait for him to come back. When she woke up the next day, there was only a little warmth around her, and he had left. Su Wan didn't even have time to say a word to Gu Huizi. He knew that the situation was tense now. The atmosphere in the capital was solemn, and there was a feeling that a storm was about to come, and he was at his wit's end. But I'm also afraid that on the day she leaves, I won't be able to see her or even say a word to her. On the last day, she prepared some ointment and decided to wait until he came. The regent and Luo Chen were not in the mansion either, so Su Wan had dinner alone. She was about to go to Gu's house, and just when she got up, she heard steady footsteps approaching from far away. Looking up, he saw Gu Huizi coming through the night. There were rows of lanterns hanging under the eaves of the corridor, and the light inside flickered on and off. He seemed to be aware of it, and stopped under the lanterns, looking at them with dark eyes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruanmeng Baobao. Chapter 196. When Su Wan looked at him so straightly, she suddenly felt uncomfortable, and she hooked her hair behind her ears with her fingers. Come here, Gu Huizi waved to her. With a smile on his brows and affection in his eyes, strong and straightforward, he stood under the eaves of the corridor waiting for his girl. Su Wan pulled up her skirt and walked towards him, suddenly feeling shy like a young girl running towards her lover. Have you eaten? Gu Huizi stretched out two fingers and naturally closed her lapels. Su Wan smelled the faint aroma of wine on his body. It was not unpleasant, but rather intoxicating. Have you been drinking? Gu Huizi smiled and said, take a walk. Since his health had improved, Su Wan would naturally not stop him from drinking. He did not answer, nor did he ask any more disappointing questions. The two of them walked side by side along the bluestone slabs, with the breeze blowing on their faces. They didn't feel cold, but felt peaceful inside. She enjoyed the moment. Sujihong is dead, Gu Huizi said suddenly. Su Wan was stunned, as if he was expecting it. Father did it? Su Wan guessed that it was not him who did it, and it had nothing to do with him. Yes, he responded in a low voice and said concisely. The prince moved his hand. Have you got the handle? Su Wan tilted her head to look at him. Under the dim moonlight, his outline was very deep, and his eyes were too deep to be seen. Aware of her gaze, he turned his head and looked over. The darkness in his eyes suddenly faded away, and he smiled, brighter than the breeze and the bright moon. She was fascinated by the sight. I'm leaving tomorrow. It's been more than half a year. I really can't bear to leave you. Gu Huizi was silent and did not answer the previous question. He held her hand, which was incredibly soft and delicate. You can write to me. It will take 2 or 3 months to go to Ziliang. By the time my letter reaches you, I have already come back before I receive your reply. Suwon felt empty when she thought about being apart for so long. If he also, how nice would it be to go together? He needs to be in charge on Jingcheng Road. Their trip to Ziliang was too hasty, and his father had no time to arrange many things, so he needed to deal with the aftermath. No, Gu Huizi chuckled. From the day you left, I wrote to you every day. On the second day after you arrived in Ziliang, you received letters every day. He rubbed her. He took his hand and kissed his lips gently, with a slight smile in his eyes. What do you think? Suwon's heartstrings were plucked. She bit her lower lip and said softly, you are so busy that you come home late. How can you have time to write to me? Shouldn't we each write to each other? How boring is that? Writing letters means going back and forth, asking questions and answering questions, and then telling some of the things you have encountered and your feelings. After you receive the letter, write a reply to each letter and keep it for yourself when you bring it back. Read it to me and I will answer you one by one. You are so thoughtful. Suwon rolled her eyes. After being apart for so long, she received a letter from him every day, and she would inevitably write some sour words in her reply. How embarrassing would it be to read it out in front of him? He put his arms around her waist and leaned close to her. Suwon's heart skipped a beat, his breath hit her face, and his hands were very hot. He held her waist firmly. Her throat was a little tight, but she didn't move away. He took her lips in his mouth and invaded her lips and tongue bit by bit. Suwon's heart trembled slightly, and her hands couldn't help but grab the fabric at his waist, trying to respond to him. Gu Huizi let go of Suwon and rubbed the corners of her lips for a while. Suwon leaned in his arms, her cheeks were red and her breathing was a little rough. I will send you away at this time, Gu Huizi said reluctantly. Have you packed everything? The departure time was advanced. Suwon felt regretful and didn't ask any more questions. They might have other plans for her safety. It's packed. You came back home so early today, specifically to see me off. Suwon hugged Gu Huizi tightly. You have to wait for me to come back. Gu Huizi didn't speak, just rubbed her head. You go ahead alone, Mon will escort you away, and then you can meet up with your father-in-law. Should I leave first? Suwon suddenly raised her head, frowning tightly, and said with a solemn expression, Father, do you want to be obeyed? No. Gu Huizi shook his head. The prince set up an ambush. You two are traveling together. The team is large and will attract attention. If you act separately, you must be secretive. Suwon was doubtful and had no other emotions. Should I leave now? Gu Huizi observed her face and saw that she was serious. He glanced at the sky and whispered, Okay, you can leave Xiao Tao in the mansion, and I will arrange for someone else to take care of you. Gu Huizi took her hand and walked into the house. Suwon had no objection. The person arranged by Gu Huizi must be skilled in martial arts. Xiao Tao didn't know martial arts, so it would be more dangerous to bring him there. I only brought a box of clothes, various poisons, antidotes, and silver needles. Gu Huizi gave her a pair of servant's clothes. Put them on. Suwon's eyes changed and she didn't say anything. She changed into the boy's clothes, combed her hair again, then mingled with several boys and followed Luo Cheng out. Luo Cheng rode a horse and the boys walked, and went directly to the embroidery building to get the clothes made by Suwon. Suwon followed the boy inside, and the shop seemed to have been cleared of customers. Except for a few embroiderers and a boy, there was no one else. While the other boys were moving things, Suwan was pushed into a corner by Luo Cheng and hid in the room where she was trying on clothes. The former servant in the embroidery building, who was very handsome and about the same height as her, took her place and moved things away with Luo Cheng. Put on the eldest lady. The embroiderer came in with a set of clothes and helped Suwan take off her servant clothes. Someone will come to buy clothes later. You can leave with them. Mon is waiting there. I'm tired. Suwan quickly changed into clothes. The embroiderer helped her make a double bun. She had already prepared things inside. She used a wet handkerchief to take off her makeup and put on a new one. After a while, a woman came to buy clothes. A huge procession brought many maids, each of whom covered their face with a veil. Suwan was put into the accompanying car by Xiu Niang and followed to the Red Sleeve Tower. Miss Zhao, my master invites you. Someone stopped the woman. Suwan looked up and saw the woman pointing towards her. You, follow me to the carriage. She lowered her head and got into the carriage with the woman. There were two people in the carriage, one of whom was dressed like her. Miss, her name is Qing Yuan, and she will take care of you along the way. It's dark at night, so I won't delay you on your way. Zhao didn't introduce much, pulled the skirt of his clothes loose, and wiped away the lipstick from his lips. Dizzy a little on the chin, creating a charming scene, and took another person down. At night, when business in the brothel was booming, Zhao looked like this. Others looked at him, laughed meaningfully, and didn't think much about anything else. Suwan was tormented and realized that everyone in the regent's palace was probably being watched, otherwise Gu Huizi wouldn't have arranged for someone he had never met to pick her up. The carriage left the capital, passed through a small town, and transferred to Moun's carriage. They went to the agreed place to wait for the regent. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 197. The process of waiting is always filled with anxiety. In order to divert attention, Suwan asked about the people and things he had contacted tonight, especially the girl who was recruiting children. Qing Yuan, her maid, usually wears a veil. Suwan frowned. The pomp and ceremony that Miss Zhao traveled with was even greater than that of ladies and young ladies from famous families. Qing Yuan is about 17 or 18 years old, with an ordinary appearance and a heroic spirit between his eyebrows. The long hair is tied into a ponytail, which looks refreshing and neat. Miss Zhao is the #1 person promoted by Hongxiu Tower. There are many things that the master needs her to do, so he deliberately builds momentum for her from the beginning. The maids around her wear veils from the beginning, and there are rumors in the capital that Miss Zhao can't see her. She is used to people who are more beautiful than her, and she doesn't like people who are ordinary looking, so she arranges people to wear veils. This rumor has brought her a lot of popularity, and everyone wants to see if the people who serve her are as rumored. You are like a carefully selected beauty, and you have to sacrifice a lot of money for her. Qing Yuan explained from the side. Young lady, don't worry, those maids wore them specially for you today. Girls like Zhao act in a high-profile manner. Such a sudden move will attract people's attention. People doubt it? Suwan understood that by doing this, Zhao could kill two birds with one stone. While attracting business for Hongxiu Tower, it was also convenient for him to steal and replace others. Those who can know her identity are the ones who are the focus of cultivation. Officials and wealthy businessmen go to brothels to discuss business, which has become a kind of drinking culture. Brothels are regarded as a huge place for obtaining information. As the saying goes, the most dangerous place is the safest place. Miss Zhao behaves in a flamboyant manner and is the #1 courtesan in the capital. Who would have thought that I would leave the capital in her team? Suwan suddenly remembered something. Doesn't anyone know that my father is the mastermind behind this? Qing Yuan suddenly smiled. No one knows that the owner behind it is the master. When it was founded, the master selected a candidate with a suitable family background and asked him to be the owner of Hongxiu Tower and surrender to the prince. He has a high position in the capital and is well informed. People just think that the Red Sleeve Tower is backed by the prince and is the prince's property, so most of the people from the prince's party come to the Red Sleeve Tower. Suwon couldn't help but feel happy. Didn't all the news about the prince reach his father's ears? It is indeed an old fox. She couldn't help but said seriously, "What's the situation of father?" "Don't worry, miss, the master is fine." Qingyuan said nothing more. Suwon stood up uneasily, came to the window, and opened it. This is a small farmhouse with a few adobe houses. The yard is empty and there is not a single plant or tree in sight. Did the carriage that brought me from the capital leave in the opposite direction to us? Yes, go south. Qingyuan was not good at words and advised, the master will arrive before dark. Suwon looked at the bright sky. It was not yet bright yet, and she had to wait until dark. If you wait a moment longer, your anxiety will increase. "Miss, would you like to sleep for a while?" Qingyuan made the bed for her. "You guys should get some sleep first. After my father comes, he may have to go on a journey. Then I can sleep." Suwon couldn't sleep with something in her mind, so she took out a medical book and said, "I'll read it for a while." Qingyuan didn't dare to sleep and kept observing the situation. If the master is going to touch the prince must have a sense of crisis and will fight to the death. The sky was white, and the door of the Prince Regent's palace was wide open. The regent went to the palace, this time as an envoy to Ziliang. The accompanying officials were Mr. Wen, the Minister of Etiquette, and Mr. Li, the young minister of Honglu Temple. They traveled with a team of people and congratulatory gifts. The prince stood on the palace wall, looking at the retreating team, smoothing the wrinkles on his broad sleeves. Jilin asked from the side, "Your Highness, when will you act?" "You don't have to worry about this matter. I have my own arrangements." The prince looked away and looked down the palace wall. He met the servant who came in a hurry. The man looked around and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, Suwon left last night. In the capital, the people below found a suspicious carriage. It left the city after the city gate was closed last night. Do you want to pursue it?" "Go after her immediately," the prince said sternly with a sinister look on his face. "If Suwon is willing to come back, I will treat her well. If she resists, I will kill her on the spot." "Yes," the chamberlain took the order and left. The prince fights against the odds, the winner is the king and the loser is the bandit. Even if the regent is alive, Suwon will still have it in his hands. The poison in him cannot be cured. As the procession left the capital, the prince regent leaned on a soft pillow and covered himself with a thin blanket. He was flipping through a book of chronicles of Zhou history in his hand, covering his mouth and coughing from time to time. "Where is Lingzhao? It should be here." The regent felt uncomfortable and coughed several times. "Is there any news from the prince's side?" The regent thought about the prince's actions casually. He has many elite soldiers in his hands, and there may be ambushes along the way. Luo Cheng replied, "You ordered to trace his weapons arsenal. After Sujihong's death, the prince destroyed the arsenal and a large number of the contents were transported away." The prince regent suddenly sat upright, opened the car curtain, and saw a long team, starting to walk towards the narrow and dangerous mountain pass ahead. With a stern look in his eyes, he said in a cold voice, "Instruct the team to stop and let a few horses go first." Luo Cheng instantly understood what the regent meant. When marching for battle, the enemy would set up an ambush at the pass, so he had to be cautious. "My subordinates will do it now." Luo Cheng got off the carriage and arranged 3 horses to line up in front of the Mercedes to clear the way. After the arrangements were made, he quickly returned to the carriage. "Do you suspect that the prince will set an ambush on the road?" Luo Cheng frowned. If there was an ambush on the road, the other party would hide and would not scare the horses to alert them. The regent was about to speak when there was a sudden bang, as if something exploded. The carriage suddenly stopped. Boom! 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 A series of explosions shook the earth. The regent's eyes fell on the opened chronicles of Zhou history, which began with a record: during the Battle of Hulu Valley, firearms were hidden in the ground, and when men and horses encountered them, they were often killed. Luo Cheng's expression changed greatly. He opened the car curtain and saw thick smoke billowing in front of him. Blood mist filled the sky. The strong smell of blood and saltpeter spread over him, making it impossible to see clearly what was going on around him. His face became particularly ugly, and he said angrily, "Master, the prince actually planted a mine. I'm going to take a look." After saying that, he jumped out of the carriage and was stabbed in the face by a long sword. He quickly dodged it, drew out the soft sword from his waist to deal with it, and shouted, "There are assassins, protect the master." The young minister of Honglu Temple and Lord Wen, the minister of rites, could not see clearly the situation in front of them and shouted, "Everyone is approaching the carriage, no one is allowed to move." The guards surrounded the carriage and Mr. Li and Mr. Wen, and they could only rely on the movement around them to kill the enemy. Mr. Li and Mr. Wen had their hearts hanging in their throats. The people around them fell one by one, their faces were covered with hot blood, and their faces were pale. They moved to the side of the carriage fearfully and climbed onto the carriage quickly. Ah! Master Wen felt a pain in his back, threw himself into the carriage, and stabbed a long sword into the wall of the carriage. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruanmeng Baobao. Chapter 198. Your Majesty. Mr. Wen cried out loudly. Seeing clearly the situation inside the carriage, he opened his eyes wide in shock. "Your Majesty, where is your Majesty?" Mr. Li looked expressionless, looking at the carriage without anyone except him and Mr. Wen, confused. "Your Majesty was captured by thieves." Master Wen endured the pain from the wound on his back and looked at the long sword that had penetrated the carriage. It was stuck there motionless. The person who had stabbed him was probably dead. Hearing the fighting outside, the sound of killings shaking the sky, and the screams piercing the sky, he carefully opened the curtain, only to find that the white mist had dispersed, and there was a melee. The men in black who carried out the assassination watched as an elite force appeared out of nowhere and surrounded them, crushing them and harvesting them. The blood mist that filled the air seemed to cover Mr. Wen's face. There was a thick smell of blood in his nose, and there was a spasm in his stomach, which made him almost feel sick. Holding back, he shouted, "The regent is missing and was captured by thieves." Upon hearing this, the regent's elite soldiers immediately pursued him. Luo Cheng penetrated the assassin's chest with his sword and withdrew the sword. The last man in black fell to the ground, blood dripping from the tip of Luo Cheng's sword. He picked up the token on the assassin's waist and caught it with his hand, his eyes murderous. Stern. "Prince." Lord Wen was shocked. "Tai, Prince." Luo Cheng approached the carriage and saw the symbols on the wall. He threw the token in through the window. Mr. Wen caught it in a hurry and touched the blood on his hand. His hand trembled uncontrollably. He suppressed the dizziness and recognized it. "I looked at the token and it was indeed the prince's." "Vice General Luo, the prince has captured the prince, what should we do? Should Lord Li and I continue the trip to Ziliang, or should we return to the court to discuss it separately?" Lord Wen managed to maintain his composure. "Luo Chindao, Mr. Wen, you are injured. Please follow Mr. Li back to the capital first. There is no rush for the trip to Ziliang. Safety is the most important thing. There is a group of people chasing the prince in the direction of the capital. I will lead people all the way to Ziliang to have a look. Did the assassin kidnap the prince and go here? If he is met by me, he will go straight to Ziliang. If he is not met, I will give the congratulatory gift to the Queen of Ziliang to apologize to her." Mr. Wen hesitated and looked through the carriage window at the dead bodies lying on the ground. Several horses were blown apart beyond recognition, and the blood dyed the soil red. Luo Cheng looked at the narrow mountain road ahead and said solemnly, maybe there are mines ahead. Go back to the capital. Mr. Li was still frightened and said angrily, the prince killed the regent and the court official. This matter must be reported to the court. Mr. Wen had no objection. Luo Cheng arranged for all the guards to escort Mr. Wen and Mr. Li back to the capital. An elite team from the regent's palace escorted He Li with Luo Cheng, clearing the mines ahead and heading west. Suwan waited until sunset. The setting sun dyed the vast clouds red. Suwan looked at the gorgeous red, and her heart felt heavy. The uneasiness doubled. She paced back and forth in the room, and suddenly opened the door anxiously and looked at Mon, who was guarding the door. Can you go and respond? Suwan wanted to see it in person, but was afraid of being delayed. I can guarantee my own safety. Mon was unmoved and said, my duty is to protect you. Suwan looked coldly, if you don't want me to respond personally, just follow my orders. Mon frowned. Suwan gave him a cold look, indicating that what she said was true. She came out of the room and walked directly to the door. Mon took the first step and held the door. With a sullen face, he compromised and said, come on down. Suwan stepped aside. Mon opened the door, and the sound of horse hooves suddenly came. Several black shadows rushed towards him, and Mon pulled out his knife. Master Mo, the prince is waiting in front and ordered us to come and respond. The leader of the men in black gave the code and took out his token. The prince said that only Qing Yuan and you will escort the young lady there, and the others will split up. Mon took a look at the token to confirm that it was correct, then looked into the courtyard to see Suwan hurriedly carrying a baggage. Let's go. Suwan and Qing Yuan got into a carriage and left. I don't know how much time passed before the carriage stopped and a man got up. Father, Suwan breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the person coming. The regent smiled and sat across from her. Are you in a hurry? This battle worries me. Suwan smiled. Suddenly, her nose wrinkled and she smelled a faint smell of blood. Are you injured? No injuries. The regent sighed helplessly and raised his hand to smell it. I changed my clothes. Does this smell still exist? Suwan looked solemn and said, were you assassinated? It doesn't matter. The regent raised his hand and rubbed Suwan's head. I frightened you. This matter was in his plan. The prince wanted to take action against him. This was the best opportunity. The prince would not miss the opportunity. Therefore, if he sent Suwan away early, uncontrollable accidents would occur and Suwan would be put in danger. He used himself as bait and specially appointed 2 court ministers as envoys to go with him to the western Liang kingdom, in order to serve as witnesses and accuse the prince of assassinating him. In addition to the people accompanying him on the surface, he arranged for an elite team to hide in the dark, and used a trick of praying mantis to catch the cicada and the oriole behind. But after hearing Luo Cheng say that the prince's armory was destroyed and all the firearms in it were removed, he suspected that the prince would lay mines on the road. Sure enough, the prince buried mines in a narrow mountain pass, intending to blow him up. Even if it didn't kill him, when the thunder exploded, the white mist billowed, and the prince's ambush took the opportunity to assassinate him. His elite soldiers surrounded him from behind and killed the prince's men. He changed his mind temporarily and took advantage of the white mist to hide in the carriage beforehand, and took the waterway to meet Suwan. Before leaving Beijing, he made several plans and left symbols on the carriage. Luo Cheng naturally knew that he was safe. When the time comes, Luo Cheng will spread the news that he has been captured by the prince's people. The court will send people to search for his traces with great fanfare. Some demons and monsters who take the opportunity to kill him will not dare to take action easily. He and Suwan can be safer along the way. You shouldn't send me away. I'm not as weak as you think. Suwan was worried and checked up and down to make sure he was not injured. She felt a little calmer. I can also protect you. The regent chuckled a few times, the frost in his eyes melted away, and said kindly, you are considerate of my first-time father. Even if you are 90% sure, you don't dare to take the 10% risk. I want to make sure you are safe. Suwon felt warm in her heart, took out the fragrant beads from her bag, and put them on the regent's wrist. This can dissipate the smell. Seeing that the regent's face was a little pale, she quickly packed up the carriage. You go to bed first one time. The prince regent was indeed tired. He leaned against the wall of the carriage and closed his eyes to rest. Suwon covered him with a thin blanket, hoping that the journey would be smooth and there would be no more assassins. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Bao. Chapter 199. East Palace, Wanfen Hall. The prince stood under the eaves of the corridor, and the autumn wind blew the dead leaves flying around his feet, spreading a thin layer of yellow on the ground. The palace maid is holding a broom and sweeping the fallen leaves. He bent down and picked up a fallen leaf. The ginkgo leaves, which usually only start to fall in October, have already started to fall in September. Suwon's favorite was the ginkgo tree. From October to November every year, she would live in the Queen's Side Hall. During the day, she would come to the Wanfen Hall to look at the fallen leaves. She would collect the fallen leaves with her ingenuity. Tie the flowers into small bouquets and decorate them in the porcelain vase. There has been no news from the people sent out yet. The prince felt a little uneasy. Jilin, who was waiting aside, came forward and said, "Your Highness, what are your orders?" Just as the prince was about to speak, he saw the imperial guard surrounding the East Palace and broke in. "Your Highness, I have ordered you to be imprisoned in the Zongren mansion by order of the regent." The commander of the imperial guard showed his token. The prince's face darkened and he scolded, "How outrageous! What crime did I commit to make your uncle issue this order?" His Royal Highness assassinated the clan members and court officials. Mr. Wen and Mr. Li found a token about His Highness on the assassin. They will temporarily imprison His Highness in the clan mansion until the regent returns to the court for personal trial. The commander of the Imperial Guard waved his hand. The army immediately stepped forward to arrest the prince. The prince's face was ashen. The people in the clan mansion were all imprisoned by members of the royal family who had committed serious crimes. Under normal circumstances, very few of those imprisoned could be released, and they were sentenced to life imprisonment. He knew in his heart that he might have failed and let Ji Xian escape. It's just that the soldiers he sent out were dead soldiers, and there was no way they would have tokens on them. There was no doubt that Ji Xian framed him. Ji Xian wanted his life and was so arrogant that he framed him blatantly and arrested him violently. What if I refused to be arrested? The guards and dead soldiers from the East Palace rushed out to protect the prince. Jilin protects the prince. I'm offended. The commander of the Imperial Guard stepped forward in person. The prince took a step back, and suddenly, Jilin held him hostage, with a cold sword pressed against his neck. "Your Highness, I'm offended," Jilin whispered. The prince was stunned, and in an instant he understood what was going on. His face turned purple and was extremely frightening, and the veins on his forehead popped out. He was extremely angry. "Jilin, why have I ever treated you poorly? You betrayed your master." Jilin's master has only been one person from beginning to end. Jilin looked calm. "My master rescued me from the pile of dead people. Jilin's life belongs to my master." Jilin was 13 years old and followed the 9-year-old prince. From that time on, the regent had been arranging arrangements around the prince. The prince suddenly laughed loudly, feeling that it was pathetic and ridiculous. He had been planning for 10 years, but it was just to make wedding clothes for others. He thought he had a trump card and a bargaining chip to make a comeback, but he didn't know that as early as the year he was crowned the prince, others had placed spies around him, and his trusted left and right arms were all the work of others. A complete failure. There is no room for struggle. How can he be willing to do so? God seemed to have heard Suwon's prayers. The journey in the past few months had been very smooth, and no assassins were encountered. Perhaps it was because they drove lightly and kept simple, and did not attract attention. People in Daz who did not know about their itinerary. Taking into account the regent's health, they traveled day and night for more than 2 months, shortening the journey by almost a month. In early December, we arrived at the capital of Ziliang Kingdom. Suwon was sitting in the carriage, feeling so depressed that she almost went crazy. Fortunately, the regent was well informed. When she got bored, he would tell her stories about his expeditions to the north and south, as well as the customs of various countries. The regent was very weak, but he always cheered up and told her vividly. He talked more along the way than he had ever said in his life, which made Suwon go crazy every time. He told stories well and always ended at the most exciting point. She listened to every story in a series. Even though I was scratching my head and wanted to know the follow-up, I felt sorry for the regent's health and suppressed my thirst for knowledge. When she had nothing to do, she studied medical books. On this day, she also studied the medical books thoroughly. As long as she saw Chi-min, she could cure the poison. Suwon glanced at the regent's sleeping face, her eyebrows were furrowed tightly, as if she was holding back the pain. She pursed her lips, opened the curtain with her fingers, and looked at the powerful characters capital of the West Liang Kingdom. Her eyes fell on the people lining up to enter the city were dressed the same as those in Zhou dynasty. The carriage moved slowly, and when it was their turn to check on them, they saw a female official standing at the city gate, walking towards them. Zhou Wen bowed and said, "Prince Regent, my subordinate is Zhou Wen, the Minister of Rights. I am here to welcome you by order of the Queen." Suwon was shocked. The Queen of Ziliang Kingdom already knew about their itinerary? Could it be that as soon as you enter the boundary of Ziliang, someone will be watching you? Suwon was just thinking about whether to wake up the Prince Regent. He had already opened his eyes and said hoarsely, "I am not feeling well. Please lead the way." Zhou Wen was stunned for a moment, knowing Ji Xian's nature, so she said no more and led the person to the Siyi Pavilion where foreign envoys were received. Officials from Ziliang accompanied them, so Suwon suppressed her curiosity about Ziliang and did not lift the curtain to see the situation in the capital. However, along the way, when looking at the national conditions of Ziliang, she found that it was very rich. Suwon saw that the regent looked very bad, so she took out a medicine bottle and took a few pills. She hurriedly handed over a glass of water. "Father, shall we go into the palace to see the Queen of Ziliang tomorrow?" In a few days the Prince Regent drank a glass of water, handed the cup to Suwon, and pressed his palm on his stinging head. "Take a good rest." Suwon nodded. The carriage stopped at Siyi Pavilion, and Suwon helped the regent get out of the carriage. Zhou Wen did not dare to look directly at the regent and led the people into the courtyard that had been prepared by the Siyi Pavilion. "The regent has been tired from traveling and traveling. The queen has ordered that you come down and have a good rest. There will be a banquet in the palace tomorrow night to cleanse you from the wind and dust." "Thank you." The late regent of Su dynasty returned. The closer he got to the capital of the Western Liang Kingdom, the worse the regent's health became. The specific situation was that he became more and more lethargic and did not speak much when he was awake. Zhou Wen asked someone to serve the regent and Suwon. She exited the courtyard and looked back at Suwon who was surrounding the regent. She frowned and felt that even though Suwon was a doctor, his behavior was too intimate. Suwon didn't think much and put the regent to sleep. She exited the inner room and looked in the direction of the palace, looking forward to tomorrow's palace banquet. "Miss Su, would you like to have a meal?" the maid asked respectfully. Suwon shook her head. She had no appetite. Instead, she asked, "Is the queen well?" The queen was just a little weak after giving birth. After years of adjustment by the imperial doctors, She has recovered well, the maid said with a smile. A few days ago, the queen led all the officials to the royal hunting ground for winter hunting. Suwon frowned. She could participate in the winter hunting. The queen of Ziliang didn't seem to be ill. So why is my father's situation getting worse and worse? The author has something to say. I rub my little hands together excitedly. We can meet tomorrow. Good night, babies. Okay. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Bao. Chapter 200. Suwon gave the purse containing the reward to the maid, asked about the customs of Ziliang, and also found out some things about the Queen of Ziliang. When the maid mentioned the Queen of Ziliang, she couldn't help but say, the late emperor used to have 2 princes and an imperial daughter. Our current queen is the late emperor who lived among the people. She is a legacy in the world. She is a wise master with literary and military skills. Under her rule, Ziliang became more and more prosperous. The queen and her husband had a deep love for each other, and they gave birth to a pair of twins. This is a good omen for our Ziliang. Suwon smiled. Take me to the kitchen. Okay, come with me. The maid led Suwon to the kitchen. All ingredients are available in the kitchen. All the way to Ziliang Kingdom, the food was rough. The regent had a picky taste, and because of his poor health, the food was not good. Only when the meal happened to pass through a small town, county, or prefecture, Suwon would give him some money and cook for him. The regent had not eaten since last night. Suwon planned to cook a pot of millet porridge, fish soup, and egg soup. The regent didn't like to eat fish because he thought fish had fish bones. Suwon took off a cloak. The empty kitchen seemed cold. She shook her head and asked the maid to close the kitchen door. She washed the millet and boiled it in the pot, then selected a herring of about half a pound, slaughtered and processed the internal organs, removed the fish bones, cooked it in boiling water, put it in the pot, poured the prepared sauce on the fish, and sprinkled a little ground ginger. The maid stood aside and stared blankly. Is this all right? She looked at the fish on the plate. It was bright yellow in color, and the sauce was not thick or oily. It was very clear and looked very appetizing. Find me a food box. Suwon took out the egg custard with a handkerchief, poured the sauce on it, and garnished it with chopped green onions. Wait a moment. The maid quickly went to get the food box. Suwon packed a cup of thick millet porridge and placed it on the bottom layer. Fish soup and egg custard were placed on the top layer. She put on her cloak and carried the food box to the regent's house. Luo Cheng has arrived, and the regent has stood up and is discussing with him. When Suwon arrived, the two of them had just finished their discussion. Luo Cheng, who was dressed in dust, smiled and said, "Miss, I'll go freshen up first." "Okay, I'll tell the maid to have the kitchen prepare meals for you." Suwon put down the food box, sent Luo Cheng out, and told the maid guarding the door, "Go and ask the cook to cook a sumptuous meal." The maid lowered her eyebrows and responded, "Yes." She turned and left. When Suwon returned to the room, she saw the regent washing his hands and sitting at the table. "Are you feeling better?" Suwon closed the door, walked quickly to the table, opened the food box, took out the fish soup and egg custard inside, and placed the last bowl of millet porridge in front of him. "Eat while it's hot." There was a fire in the room, and Suwon sat down by the fire to warm her hands, which made her stiff fingers feel a little better. "Why don't you bring a hand stove with you when you go out? It's cold in winter, so you don't have to cook by yourself. My usual cook is here with Luo Cheng, and I will leave the rest of the meals to the cook." The regent frowned when he saw Suwon's fingers were red. "Have you got a meal yet?" "Already eaten," Suwon urged. "Eat quickly, this porridge is good for your stomach." The prince regent stopped talking and ate 2 bites of porridge, then 2 bites of tender egg custard, and finally tasted fish custard. The fish meat was smooth and tender, and tasted like crab soup. There was no thorn at all, which showed that Suwon was too dedicated to his meal. "Do you want to go out for a walk today?" The Prince Regent ate some food and felt a little better. Father, I will accompany you for a walk. No, I want to sleep. Suwon was worried that if she went out at this time, she would hear people talking about the queen. The queen was deeply in love with her husband and they gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. He was afraid that 1,000 arrows would pierce his heart. Suwon couldn't bear it. Even if he has to find out sooner or later, I want him to be clean today. Okay, you go to bed, and I will read a book. The regent put down his chopsticks, rinsed his mouth with water, drank a few sips of hot water, wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, and leaned on the soft couch. The soft couch was covered with a piece of fox fur, which was very warm. Suwon left and went back to her room to write a letter to Gu Huizi. Zhang Cheng entered the regent's house and reported the news. Master, the Queen of Ziliang is the daughter of General Qi. She married the son of General Wei Yiwen and was canonized as queen. The two have a very deep relationship and have a pair of dragons and phoenixes. There are several male concubines in the harem, but the queen only favors male concubines. The regent's face was calm and unruffled. He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Step back, I know better. In normal times, he would definitely be unwilling and jealous. But now that her health is getting worse day by day, the regent thinks that it is good as it is now. He will not live long. She is so young and has not yet passed half of her life. It is good to have someone by her side. Even though he suddenly understood it, it was still difficult to understand. The child Qi Min had with another man has been loved by his parents since childhood. His child had suffered a lot since childhood. He had a mother but was not around. He had just recognized his father and was about to lose his father. The heartache is unbearable. The regent thought of Suwon's cautious look just now, fearing that he would be depressed and uneasy because of Qi Min's new marriage, and his heart seemed to be tightly grasped by a hand. He didn't know the purpose of this trip, but it made Suwon sad. That night, the rooms of the Prince Regent and Suwon were filled with things given by the palace. Suwon didn't know what the regent was feeling, but she looked at the things in the room and couldn't sleep all night. This special treatment is enough to show that the queen recognizes them. On the evening of the second day, Suwon entered the palace with the regent. The Queen of Ziliang received the envoys of the three kingdoms in the Junhua Palace. Suwon and the regent were the last to arrive, and people from the other three countries had already arrived. The two people sat down under the guidance of the palace maid. The people from several countries nodded slightly as a greeting. Suwon looked at the seat on the high seat. The Queen of Ziliang had not arrived yet. She felt nervous for no reason, clasped her hands together, and her eyes fell on the delicate pastries in front of her. Don't worry, my father will not lose his composure. The regent patted the back of her hand and told her to relax. Suwon smiled at him. The regent picked up a piece of dim sum for her with his chopsticks and handed it to her lips. This is 11 Liang's specialty dim sum. Try it. It tastes good. Suwon opened her mouth and took a bite of the dark snack, which was slightly sour in her mouth. She frowned and chewed it, a hint of sweetness came over her, and her appetite was instantly whetted. The queen is here, the chamberlain at the entrance of the palace sang loudly. Suwon looked toward the door of the palace, and met a pair of peaceful eyes. The queen's probing eyes flickered between her and the Prince Regent, and finally focused on the remaining half of the snacks held in the Prince Regent's chopsticks, and a flash of light flashed through her eyes. Something strange. In the eyes of the queen, she did not see the complexity of reuniting with the regent after a long separation. Instead, she saw curiosity and doubt, as if she suspected that she and the regent were in a relationship. Suwon's mind buzzed and she realized a serious problem. The queen was not Qi Min.